What if the very pain you're hiding from is the doorway to your destiny? What if the voice you've silenced in fear is actually God's whisper, calling you to your true self? This message is not just to stir your heart, it's to awaken your soul. There is a strange comfort in the shadows. They ask nothing of us but silence. They require no action, no confrontation, no risk. They invite us to remain unseen, unheard, untouched, to curl ourselves into the quiet places where neither man nor God might disturb us. And for many, the shadow becomes a kind of refuge, a retreat from the world's unkindness and our own inadequacies. We tell ourselves we are only resting, just for a season, just until we're strong enough, ready enough, good enough to return to the light. But seasons become years, and readiness proves a mirage. The longer we remain in the shadows, the more we forget the shape of the sun. But you were not made for shadows. There is nothing in the design of your soul that thrives in hiding. Look even at your body, how your face is made to turn toward light, how your eyes are drawn not to darkness, but to brightness, to clarity, to color. You were crafted with the ability to see beauty, to recognize truth, to be moved by goodness. The very wiring of your being cries out for the light, because that is where you were meant to live. You were formed to be seen by God and known fully by Him, not concealed behind fig leaves of shame or buried beneath layers of carefully managed image. There is a dignity in you, not earned, but given, and it does not flourish in the shadows. In the shadows, that dignity becomes distorted, hidden even from yourself. You forget the majesty of what it means to be human, to be alive with purpose, to be marked by divine intention. The shadows will lie to you. They will whisper that safety is more important than calling, that survival is more valuable than transformation, that obscurity is preferable to rejection. And slowly, without quite knowing when, you begin to shrink. You reduce your dreams to match your fears. You silence your voice to avoid conflict. You suppress your convictions because clarity is often lonely. You begin to think that maybe anonymity is holy, that maybe God prefers the quiet soul who never dares. But holiness is not passivity. Holiness is fire. Holiness is courage. Holiness is love that acts, speaks, moves, risks, bleeds, and you were made to burn with it. You were made not only to reflect light, but to carry it into every room, every relationship, every realm that has grown too comfortable with the dark. There is something sinister about the way we make peace with the shadows. We spiritualize our silence. We baptize our fear as discernment. We convince ourselves that hiding is humble, when in truth it is pride dressed in insecurity. Pride that says, God can't use someone like me. Pride that assumes our wounds disqualify us from being a witness. But that is not humility. That is doubt. That is unbelief. That is forgetting who the light is and who you are because of it. For if He called you from the dust, if He breathed life into your lungs and shaped eternity into your soul, then surely He has not called you to remain hidden. He has not lit your candle only to place it beneath a basket. He has not stirred your heart only to have you silence it. The very nature of light is to reveal, to illumine, to break the power of darkness. And if you are His, truly His, then light is your nature too. It is a strange paradox, but one repeated in every sacred story, that those who are most afraid are often those most chosen, that those who believe they have nothing to offer are precisely those from whom the greatest courage erupts. Think of the prophets, stammering with doubt. Think of the shepherds, unnoticed by the world. Think of the disciples, afraid of the waves. And yet it was to them the light came, through them the light moved. What they had in common was not perfection, but obedience. Not confidence, but a willingness to step from the shadows when they were called. And they were always called. The light is never content to leave us in hiding. It will reach into caves, into closets, into corners of the soul long abandoned, and speak that ancient, relentless invitation. Come forth, not because you are sufficient, but because He is. Not because you are fearless, but because He is with you. And though the shadows will plead with you to stay, though they will offer their false peace again and again, there will always be something louder, stronger, more eternal. The call of the light, echoing within you, unsettling your comfort, pulling you back to who you were always meant to be. There is a terrible misconception, subtly woven into the minds of many believers, that divine calling is reserved only for the already capable, that God's summons comes exclusively to those who are prepared, polished, and practiced in the art of righteousness. We have convinced ourselves that God chooses only the strong, only the qualified, only those who have already proven their worth through spotless performance or deep understanding. And because we know our flaws, we quietly excuse ourselves from the work. We do not say it aloud, for fear that it might sound like rebellion, but in the privacy of our hearts, we disqualify ourselves before God ever has the chance to speak. Surely not me, we think. Surely someone else would do this better. We shrink back, not because God has failed to call, but because we assume we must come already equipped with every tool, every answer, every gift fully matured and perfectly displayed. But this is not how God works, never has been. The pattern is ancient, written into every page of redemptive history. He does not call the equipped, He equips the called, always, consistently, without exception. He is not looking for vessels of strength, but vessels of surrender. His calling does not rest upon your readiness, it rests upon His sovereignty. And when He speaks your name, it is not because you are already enough, it is because He intends to become your enough. The invitation to step forward is not an invitation to rely on your own sufficiency, but to enter into a sacred partnership, where your weakness becomes the very stage upon which His strength is revealed. The God who fashioned the stars does not require your qualifications to display His glory. He simply requires your yes. If you were already equipped, already able, already complete, the work would be yours, and the glory would be yours too. But that is not the way of the kingdom. The kingdom flips the natural order on its head. It is the shepherd who becomes a king, the stammering tongue who becomes the voice of a nation, the barren woman who becomes the mother of a people, the fisherman who becomes a preacher, the persecutor who becomes a pastor. Over and over again, God calls the ones least expected, and then, only then, does He begin to equip them for what lies ahead. There is a divine delay between the calling and the capacity, and that delay is not failure, it is formation. You are not meant to be ready at the moment you are called. You are meant to become The of God does not come in the form of applause or immediate skill. It comes in the form of dependence. He will strip away the crutches you used to lean on. He will tear down the idols of competence you quietly worshipped. He will, in His mercy, make you aware of your lack, so that you may cling to His fullness. And it is precisely there, in that place of humbling, that the true equipping begins. You begin to pray differently. You begin to listen more carefully. You begin to realize that success in God's economy is not measured by effectiveness, but by faithfulness. You are not called to be impressive. You are called to be obedient. And obedience, though small in the moment, unlocks the storehouses of heaven. Many are waiting to be equipped before they say yes. They wait for the fear to disappear, for the doors to swing open, for the words to form easily on their tongue. But faith does not work that way. Faith is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to move through fear with trust. And the equipping of God is often hidden in the journey, revealed only as you walk it. You will not find it by standing still. You will not discover your strength by remaining in the safety of your excuses. You must step out. You must risk. You must dare to believe that if God has called you, then He has already prepared what you will need, even if you cannot see it yet. For He is not a deceiver. He does not summon men to battle and then deny them armor. He does not beckon women to speak and then silence their voice. When He calls, He provides. When He leads, He sustains. When He chooses, He transforms. That is the miracle. Not that we are ready, but that He makes us ready through the fire, through the process, through the very path that once terrified us. There is something profoundly tragic about the human tendency to hide, not merely physically, but inwardly, invisibly, spiritually. It began in a garden, as all things did, when man, made in the very image of God, first tasted shame. In that moment, when guilt entered through disobedience, hiding became instinct. It was not taught, it was immediate. The man covered himself with leaves, not because God could not see him, but because he could no longer bear to see himself as he now was. And from that moment onward, hiding became a pattern embedded in the soul of mankind, a reflex against truth, a shield against exposure, a barrier against love. But what we often fail to understand is that hiding does not merely conceal us, it reshapes us. It does not merely protect us from the eyes of others. It begins to erode the self we were created to be. Hiding is not passive, it is corrosive. It is a slow, subtle dismantling of identity. Every time we withdraw from the truth of who we are, we begin to exchange it for a lesser version. We start to live behind constructed masks, masks built from fear, from trauma, from the expectation of others, or from the unbearable pressure to perform. At first, these masks feel like safety. We tell ourselves they are necessary. We become the agreeable, the capable, the quiet, the strong, not because we are these things, but because it is safe to appear so. We shape ourselves according to who we believe others need us to be, not who we are. And over time, we forget there is even a difference. We begin to confuse our mask with our identity. And in doing so, we do not just hide from others, we hide from ourselves. We bury the image of God within us beneath layers of performance and pretense, believing that perhaps if we hide well enough, no one will ever discover how fragile we really are. But the tragedy deepens, for hiding always involves a lie. The lie that the truth of who we are is somehow unworthy of being seen, that the broken places in us disqualify us from love, that our doubts, our insecurities, our fears must be edited out of the story before it can be told. But this is not how the divine author writes. He writes with scars, with trembles, with cracked voices, and uncertain hands. When we hide, we deny Him access to the very material He desires to use for redemption. We keep Him locked out of the rooms where the true work must be done. And we end up wearing a self He never gave us, speaking with a voice that does not belong to us, walking a path He never asked us to follow. The longer we remain hidden, the more distorted our reflection becomes. The mirror we hold up to ourselves is no longer clean. We no longer recognize the person staring back. We are haunted by the feeling that we are not living as we ought, that there is something essential missing, something unspoken within us waiting to be brought into the light. This distortion has consequences, not only for ourselves, but for the world around us. When you hide, you rob others of the gift of your authenticity, your voice, your presence, your story. They are not just for you, they are for others who need the permission your truth provides. But when you choose concealment, those who might have been encouraged by your courage are left wandering. Your hiding becomes a silence that echoes far beyond your own soul. The identity God wove into your being, unique, irreplaceable, luminous, becomes dimmed by the shroud of self-protection. And though you may still perform the motions of life, something vital is absent. You become a ghost of yourself, present but not real, seen but not known. There is no way to hide without also reshaping the soul. The longer we conceal, the more we conform. We begin to adjust our language, our posture, even our desires, to match the persona we have created. And in doing so, we surrender the fierce clarity of our original design. We exchange freedom for control, joy for predictability, communion for distance. Hiding feels like power, but it is always a surrender. We think we are preserving ourselves, when in truth we are only dismantling the very person God created us to become. There is a common illusion, romanticized in songs and sermons alike, that when God calls a person, it comes with a sense of peace, a rush of joy, a clear path laid out beneath gentle skies. We imagine a voice from heaven, accompanied by the warmth of certainty and a deep assurance that the road ahead will be smooth because it is divinely ordained. But reality, as both Scripture and experience teach us, is something far different. The beginning of a true calling is almost never calm. It is not serene. It is not obvious. It does not arrive with a spotlight or a trumpet, but with a tremble. It begins as a stirring in the soul that interrupts your comfort and disturbs your routine. It unsettles the plans you've so carefully made and tugs at the threads of a life that once felt secure. And though it is divine, it does not feel like peace at first. It feels like disruption. The discomfort is not a mistake. It is not a sign that you've misunderstood. In fact, it is often the greatest evidence that the call is real. For God does not enter gently into a life that has been governed by self. His call is not an addition to your agenda. It is a reordering of everything. He does not merely ask for your Sunday or your spare time. He asks for the entirety of your life. And when he begins to call, he touches the areas you would rather keep untouched. He brings to light the desires you had buried, the dreams you had shelved, the fears you had normalized. His call often arrives not as an answer, but as a question that haunts you, a question that grows louder in the quiet moments. What if you are meant for more than this? It is a divine agitation, not to harm you, but to awaken you. The beginning of a calling often feels like loss of clarity, loss of control, loss of familiarity. When Abraham was called, he was told to leave his country, his people, his father's household, the very structure of his identity, and go to a land he had never seen. When Moses was called, he was hiding in the desert, haunted by failure, and God asked him to confront the very power he had once fled. When Mary was called, her entire future, her reputation, her security, her understanding of the world, was overturned with a single announcement. This is the pattern. The call of God always disrupts. It calls you away from comfort, not because comfort is evil, but because comfort can so easily become your God. The familiar becomes a cage, and the only way to lead you into the fullness of who you were created to be is to tear the veil of safety you've wrapped around your soul. Discomfort is the soil in which obedience begins to grow. It strips you of your illusions. It lays bare your dependence on things you didn't know you relied on, and it reveals what you truly believe about God. It is easy to profess trust when life is predictable. But when the call of God begins to pull you beyond your limits, into conversations you do not want to have, into cities you never planned to enter, into vocations you never thought were yours, then the substance of your faith is tested. The discomfort does not mean you are on the wrong path. It means you are being formed for it. God does not send you where you feel ready. He sends you where you must rely on Him to be ready. And that reliance is the first fruit of your calling. The world teaches us that we must find our passion and then follow it. But God often calls us into something before we have the trembling of our heart. He does not appeal to your feelings. He appeals to your spirit. And when your spirit says yes, even while your flesh protests, the calling begins to take root, not in confidence, but in surrender, not in power, but in faith. The discomfort is not the obstacle to your calling. It is the beginning of it. It is the labor pain before new birth. It is the stirring of something holy that will not let you go, even when you try to return to what was familiar. The life you once loved will begin to taste stale. The comforts you once clung to will feel like burdens. And the place that once felt like home will no longer fit, because something in you has already started to move. The human soul is impatient by nature. It is woven with longing for meaning, for fulfillment, for movement, and it wrestles with the strange silence of delay, as if delay itself were punishment. We cry out to God and expect Him to move at once, to answer not merely according to His will, but according to our schedule. We have been conditioned by a world that celebrates speed, that equates quick results with blessing and slow seasons with failure. And so, when the doors do not open, when the prayers seem to go unanswered, when the days stretch into weeks and the weeks into years without visible change, we begin to interpret divine stillness as divine absence. We mistake His waiting as His refusal. We quietly, and often unknowingly, confuse delay with denial. But this is a grave error, for delay is not a sign of abandonment. It is the workshop of God. It is the place where deeper things are done, invisible to the eyes but essential to the soul. God is never idle. He does not sleep. He does not pause in confusion or hesitation. If He delays, it is not because He has forgotten. It is because He is forming. And the formation of a soul, the bending of will, the refining of motive, the humbling of pride, the solidifying of trust, takes time. Time not measured in minutes, but in moments of surrender, in repeated choices to trust when all seems still, in the deep and hidden breaking that prepares us for the very thing we think we are waiting for. We forget that what we desire may require a version of us that does not yet exist. We want the promise now, but we are not yet strong enough to carry it. We want the platform now, but our character is not yet anchored enough to withstand it. We want the relationship now, but our love is still too self-centered to make it holy. And so God waits, not because He is withholding out of cruelty, but because He is crafting out of mercy. Delay in the hands of God is not the death of purpose, but the protection of it. He will not give you what your soul cannot yet sustain, and so He waits until the roots are deep enough to support the fruit. This waiting is not passive, it is not void, it is full of His hidden work. All throughout Scripture we see the pattern. Joseph dreamt of leadership, but was thrown into pits and prisons before he touched a throne. David was anointed king as a boy, yet spent years running in caves, misunderstood and hunted, long before he ever sat on the throne. Even Christ Himself, the eternal Son, waited in obscurity for 30 years before He began His public ministry. And when that ministry came, it led not first to glory, but to suffering. There is something about the divine order that always includes waiting. Not to tease, but to temper. Not to deny, but to prepare. Every delay is an invitation to deeper trust, to let go of our demand for immediate outcomes, and embrace the mystery of God's timing, which is always right but seldom rushed. In delay, our motives are tested. Do we want what we want only because we believe it will ease our discomfort, or do we want it because it will glorify God? In delay, our hearts are sifted. The idols of self-will are exposed, the false expectations we carried are stripped away, and we are brought face to face with the God who does not operate like a vending machine, but like a wise and holy Father. We learn in the waiting that He is not obligated to our timeline, nor is He flustered by our urgency. He is far more interested in the purity of the vessel than the speed of the journey, and if He withholds, it is because He sees what we do not, that some gifts, if given too soon, will crush us rather than crown us. So He delays, but never in vain. Every second of the silence has weight. Every moment of stillness has purpose. Every slow unfolding is part of a design we may not yet comprehend, but which will one day make perfect, radiant sense when seen from the vantage point of eternity. There exists in the human spirit a restless ache for purpose, not merely for achievement or recognition or success, but for something far more profound, the desire to live a life that matters, a life aligned with some great eternal significance. We speak often of destiny as if it were a mysterious map rolled up in heaven's attic, waiting to be discovered by the fortunate or the gifted. But the truth is both simpler and more difficult. Destiny is not found by those who chase greatness, but by those who choose obedience. Not the loud, dramatic obedience that attracts attention, but the quiet, daily surrender that often goes unseen. It is not brilliance or charisma or even boldness that unlocks a soul's true calling. It is the simple, stubborn willingness to say yes to God when every other voice tells you to hesitate. Obedience does not seem glamorous, and that is precisely why it is the gatekeeper of divine purpose. It demands trust before understanding. It asks you to move before you see. It calls you to step out, not with the certainty of the outcome, but with confidence in the one who called. And that is where many falter, not because they are rebellious, but because they are afraid. They do not disbelieve in God's power, but they quietly doubt His intentions. They want a destiny handed to them without ever having to walk the narrow, uncomfortable road of submission. They want the crown without the cross, the influence without the intimacy, the reward without the refinement. But destiny, true destiny, the kind birthed in heaven, can only be unlocked by obedience, because only obedience reshapes the soul to be fit for the weight of glory. God does not reveal the entirety of one's future all at once. He does not unroll the scroll of your life and ask for your approval. Instead, He gives light enough for the next step and then waits. Will you trust Him with what you do not see? Will you move forward even when your emotions protest and your logic raises objections? The answer to that question determines more about your future than any talent you possess. Because the doors God intends to open are not triggered by striving. They open to those who obey. The person who insists on understanding everything before they move will remain stagnant, forever analyzing, forever preparing, but never stepping. And thus, their destiny stays locked behind doors they never had the faith to approach. There is a kind of spiritual arithmetic at work here. Obedience multiplied over time equals transformation. Each act of obedience, no matter how small, aligns the heart with heaven. It chips away at pride, dismantles self-will, and builds within the soul a capacity to carry what is holy. You become someone who can be trusted with influence because you've learned to be faithful in obscurity. You become someone who can be trusted with impact because you've obeyed in secret, without applause. Obedience is what forges character in the quiet, in the fields where David tended sheep, in the wilderness where Moses wandered, in the prison where Joseph waited. These are not wasted places. They are classrooms of the called. And in each of them, God was not simply preparing a path for His servants. He was preparing His servants for the path. Many are waiting for a great moment, a burning bush, a dramatic encounter to begin the journey of destiny. But more often than not, God's voice comes softly, through a conviction in prayer, through a whisper in Scripture, through a quiet nudge that invites you to take a small step, a phone call, a confession, a release of control, a decision to forgive. These are the thresholds of destiny. They appear unimpressive, but to heaven they are monumental. Because each act of obedience, however ordinary it may feel, breaks open another door, leads you down another hallway, and pulls you deeper into the mystery of God's will. The greatest tragedy is not that people fail to dream. It is that they hear God and do not respond. They sense the stirring, but hesitate. They delay, they doubt, they disobey. And in doing so, they trade the unknown glory of obedience for the familiar mediocrity of control. Yet it is only in surrender that true life is found, for the keys to purpose are not handed to the bold, but to the faithful.